So did I like this comic? Let's get into it. Firstly, these graphic novels read more like something between a Fleming short story and a Fleming novel. It does all the location hopping of a James Bond novel with the action too, but moves through the plot and story so quickly that it feels more like a short story. I don't really have an opinion on this, it's just an observation about probably this medium itself and how these comic book storytellers work rather than Vargr, the story itself. So let's get into the story. This is written by Warren Ellis and illustrated by John Masters. Check out my last video for more info. The story starts with Bond in Helsinki assassinating a man. But the man puts up a fight, and this was something I thought was great. Bond won't kill people easily in this series, even if it's just a routine kill. Then quickly we're thrown into the plot of this story. It's about drugs. And very similar to Fleming, a bad actor abroad is doing something that's having negative impacts on the UK. So Bond is deployed to investigate. But not before we get to meet this MI6 universe crew. I like the characterization of all of them. Q is way more just the quartermaster in this. So I'm very interested to see what they do with him in the long run. As I said in the last video, it is clear that if you're basing this on just the Fleming books, it's sort of impossible not to be influenced by the film somehow. Bond's characterization and image across the world is cinematic Bond, regardless of what you think is better. But it's very clear this series wants to take its inspiration from Fleming and the novels. But then they update certain aspects of the characters and the world to make sure it works in the 21st century. And there's more humour than Fleming too, which I think works. Different medium, you gotta change things up a little. Probably inspired by cinematic Bond too. There is this interesting beat about the double O's no longer being allowed to carry firearms within the United Kingdom. I'm very interested to see if they could raise the stakes with this. There's a couple of cases where something happens to Bond and he's not armed, but you could really create a great story or plot around this, or a great action sequence. An unarmed Bond having to use nothing but wit and intelligence to get out of a scenario or defeat enemies. So when Bond arrives in Berlin, it's not a straightforward trip to the embassy. It's the sort of style of this series that every issue or chapter, as I call them, has an action beat in it. But to go back to what I said at the start, it's really great. Bond gets battered all the time. The action isn't free or it's just stylish in this. The physical conflict is always difficult for Bond. Throughout this story, the violence is brutal. It's not your pow pow comic book action. If there is a problem with this story, Slaven, the villain, is a bit meh. They say about the Bond films that a movie is only as good as its villain. And this plot definitely loses a little bit of steam around that villain. However, the henchwoman is very good and sort of makes up for it. What is most important, they got Bond right. They can figure out the villains as they go along. The plot seems right for what they're trying to do, but I think the execution could be a little bit more grounded. I see what they're trying to do with the metal arms, but Fleming always had a measured way of injecting fantasy into his novels before it became way too much or just threw out the story. Then again, there was always weird stuff in Fleming. The story takes Bond to Helsinki, Norway, London obviously, and Berlin. It definitely feels like a Bond story. It's the highest of praise I can give to Ellis and Masters. What they've done is created a very Bondian story in a completely new medium. I'm looking forward to reading what comes next in this series. Don't worry, the order's already in for 2 more books. If you like Bond and you're like me and you don't have enough Bond in your life, I recommend giving these a read. Comment below what you think of this Bond story. Kill that like button and subscribe for a Bond video every week. I'll be back on Tuesday with more.
Fate draws us back together. Now your enemy is my enemy.
When you're ready.